everybody. Welcome to Talking Hockey Sense. I'm Chris Peters. It's episode 130 of the podcast. And today we are going to talk about one of the biggest topics in hockey and possibly one of the biggest developments in developmental hockey that we could ever experience. I mean, there is a seismic shift happening. We're going to talk about it. We do have a guest today. I'll bring him in just a minute. Before we do that, want to remind you the AHL on FloHockey starts this week. So you will want to make sure that you are staying tuned to FloHockey to get all of the AHL action as it begins. We will also have we'll also have our live to social game this week. So we are going to talk about that as well a little bit later. But without further ado, I want to bring in our guest today, and he's a familiar guest to fans. It is Brad Schlossman from the Grand Forks Herald, and we are going to talk about college hockey. As Brad and I so often do, but this is a topic that we've covered before on the show, but actually have to do a little bit more digging because it is coming to the fore. And I am, of course, talking about, and first of all, Brad, welcome to the show. Great to see you again, buddy. And I like we got a St. Paul Saints hat rocking there?
That's right. Impressive. You know that.
Yeah, very good. Very big St. Paul Saints guy. Mike Veck fan, so all good things. But anyway, Brad, we're going to talk about the biggest issue probably in the developmental hockey world, and one of the biggest stories really of our careers in terms of how this is going to impact junior hockey, college hockey, things that we've covered for years and years. But of course, I'm talking about the NCAA is the wheels are in motion for a new rule or at least a removed rule where college players junior hockey players in the CHL currently ineligible by rule will be allowed to play in college hockey. And to make people understand this, one thing that I think is important to know, this actually aligns hockey with other sports that do this already. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, but this is a potentially seismic shift because the divide between CHL and NCAA has been so stark. They're very different paths. They're very different styles of hockey. There are different benefits to both sides, and players have this choice. But also players were having to make decisions at 16 years old, 15 years old of where they were going to play their hockey. Because once they played even a preseason game in the CHL, that was it. You were done. So, Brad, just kind of if you can catch us up on where things are now, and what is the actual thing that is happening with this ruling,
Yeah.
who's voting on it, what are the different things that we need to know about this process?
Yeah. For starters, I mean, I think this goes back a little ways. Everybody's aware of what's gone on with NIL and college athletics. But one of the main reasons why CHL players were ruled ineligible is because there are players who are on NHL contracts who play in the CHL. And for those that don't know, the CHL are the three Canadian major junior leagues: the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League. So sometimes the guy will sign an NHL contract, doesn't make the team, and then they get returned to their junior team. So there are some players there that are on NHL contracts. Thus, the NCAA defined the CHL as a professional league. Now, in other sports, notably like tennis, which is one of my sports, players can play again in professional tournaments as amateurs and retain their amateur status. In golf, you always see amateurs in golf tournaments. You'll see the little A by their name on the leaderboard. That means they're maintaining their amateurism through that. And but that wasn't the case with hockey and skiing, with men's hockey and skiing. Now, I think what has brought this potential change to the forefront is there was a lawsuit, someone suing who had played two OHL preseason games and is suing the NCAA for violating antitrust laws to try to gain eligibility for CHL players. And I think the NCAA looked at this and said, well, we're not going to fight this lawsuit and lose it. And also, why are hockey and skiing not under the same umbrella as everyone else? It's a very easy shift for them. And so the NCAA is going to look at that. The legislation has been formally introduced. It will be voted on in November. And I think we all think they're going to pass it. I don't know if you'll find a single person who doesn't think that it's going to be passed. And the other point I want to make, this is not coming from college hockey coaches. It's not like the coaches are saying we need this change. This is a change that's coming essentially through the court system, and the NCAA is going to adjust its laws to avoid losing another lawsuit and eventually it opening anyway. So, whether you like it or not, the change is coming, and it's coming because it has to come. It's going to be ruled on the court system that it has to come. So, they're just adjusting the rules. So, that's kind of a background of the whole situation. Hopefully, I explained that okay.
No, you explained it very well. I mean, there's a couple of other things that I think we should also note here is that the basically you still can't play college athletics with a professional contract. So
Correct.
at least at at least at this time, who knows if that'll ever change.
Correct. Yeah,
But
that's a good point.
so
Yeah.
so yeah, yeah, and so that's one thing. The other thing is the vote that's going to happen is going to happen next month. So we were kind of bracing for this to occur last week, or this week that we're recording this podcast, and they basically just provided whatever information, and now that vote is gonna happen, and it's gonna happen. I mean, everybody get ready for it because it's gonna happen. And the thing is that in the era of NIL, this conversation was starting to happen. There were a number of college agents that had said, hey, now it's time to examine this. Why is this way? There were a number, certainly there are a number of college teams that were for it. There were a lot more college coaches that were against it, as we talked about, and that they didn't want this because, I think there was a number of coaches that said, hey, we're winning the battle. We're getting Macklin Celebrini. We're getting Adam Fantilli. We're getting Owen Power. We're getting guys that are number 1 NHL draft picks or number 2 NHL draft picks from Canada to come to our, they are believing in our model. And I think that was something that was a point of pride for some of those bigger programs. But, you think about the other schools, and, obviously we have a lot of Atlantic hockey schools on FloHockey that you can watch every single weekend. And, the player pool has this opportunity to expand now. And so coaches from leagues like the CCHA, they're saying, let's get that bigger player pool. So that's another thing is that comes in. So what are, I know you've been doing a lot of reporting on this. It seems like the timeline is August 1st of 2025. That's when we expect this to essentially be allowable.
Yep. Yeah, so I think there were some questions on whether when this passes, or could players come mid-season. And yesterday or this week, they did clarify that no, it wouldn't be active until next season. That being said, now is when teams are really recruiting for next season. So I would expect to see a bunch of commitments. Of course, so there was a lot of publicity about a player committing to Arizona State from the CHL, and that was a few weeks ago. One other, for clarification, Braxton Whitehead is not why this change is happening. Braxton Whitehead anticipated, and Arizona State anticipated the change coming, and that was the commitment. Also, he is not the first CHL player to commit to the NCAA. Others have done it and have tried to get through. Almost all of them have failed. There have been a few exceptions where a player somehow got through, likely due to a clerical error with the NCAA, and was allowed to play. Braden Gelsinger for Lake Superior State did it, and Austin Swankler at Bowling Green also did it. So the next CHL player will not be the first to do it. It's been done, but it's just been these weird circumstances. So
Yeah.
those are a couple other notes.
Yeah, I think the only surprise at this point is how quickly the NCAA responded to, oh, that lawsuit's coming. Let's just cut it off at the pass. What's the point? And the other thing is too is like all they had to do was point to golf, point to tennis, and say your rules are applied inconsistently, which is always going to be a target. And if you're going to have a national, a governing body that has different rules for different people in different sports, then it doesn't really make much sense. So that's interesting as well. There are a couple of so the other thing that I want people to know, there is, like, Brad and I are probably have thought about this more than the average person has, but there is still so much that we do not know, and cannot anticipate what's going to happen. Last time we had this discussion, you and I had this big debate about, whether or not guys like, let's say, the guy that's now going to be more prevalent in this discussion, Gavin McKenna, coming to, would he have the option to go to college hockey? Would he pull a Macklin Celebrini, although he would have had that CHL experience? I've had some other discussions with sources too on this topic, because one of the things I wondered about is, would teams, would the CHL education package agreement that they all sign to play for the team, would it actually hold up and be enforceable, where you would be able to block players from going? And my thought, and I think the feeling of others, is that no, it probably isn't. And I think in a lot of cases, CHL teams can be unburdened by that education, because the agreement is that they're paying for your school if you play for numbers of years in service with that team. You want to go to 4-year school, they'll pay for it if you've given them 4 years of OHL or WHL or QMJHL time. But in terms of blocking a move to the NCAA, I don't think that's going to be possible.
I don't either.
So,
And I think one of the reasons or ways to think about the NCAA is the NCAA isn't a hockey league. I think that gets lost sometimes. The NCAA is a very large collection of academic institutions that happen to sponsor a lot of extracurricular activities, one of them being hockey. It's just kind of a small part in this huge machine. And you would, to that point, the people who are going to be making this decision, who are on the Division One council, you probably, a lot of hockey fans probably think there's a bunch of hockey people making this decision. It's like the commissioner of the SEC. Go look who's on the Division One council. These are just administrators that, they don't even sponsor hockey as their sport. They're just looking at rules and stuff. But anyways, to that point, I just can't imagine. I'm not a legal expert, so take my word with a grain of salt. But I can't imagine that a junior hockey contract can prevent a kid from attending college and participating in an extracurricular activity at that college. And that is what is happening. It is not another hockey league. It is an academic conglomerate. So I think that's the way you have to think of the NCAA on a number of things, including this rule that's going to be passed. This is not hockey GMs and owners or whatever sitting in a room making a decision. These are people from all sorts of institutions that don't even sponsor hockey, because that's what the NCAA is. So I do not foresee the CHL being able to prevent a kid from going to the NCAA.
yeah, that's, man. Yeah, I mean, like, that's the other thing about it not being a hockey organization, is that the NCAA is not under the USA Hockey umbrella. So when we talk about, like, when a player goes from the USHL to the CHL or vice versa, there is a transfer card situation. You have to kind of do these international transfers. They're not really like, like your soccer transfers. They're more just paper transactions. And but it's just in order to say, hey, this player who's a registered Hockey Canada player is going to play in the United States. And so, like, different things like that. And so that's not that NCAA is not in that. It is not bound by that. So there's really no recourse to block players. The key is, now let's talk a little bit. We've kind of talked about some of the logistics, but let's talk about, fallout. One thing that I knew when we were at the USHL talking to a lot of college coaches, I mean, every single Division I college was at the USHL Fall Classic. and you talk to a number of assistant coaches, and they were saying, hey, I'm gonna have to start getting ready to go to the WHL. I'm gonna have to start getting ready to go to the OHL and find players. And we're not, like in a lot of cases, we're talking about some of the older players. But at the same time, I don't think that the NCAA is gonna prevent that, gonna stop short of just saying, oh, we'll just take your overagers. We're just gonna take the guys that are on their way out. No, that's not how this is gonna work. The other thing that I think is important to know about all of that is just, basically some players are going to stay on the college, whatever the traditional college path has been, because that's their preference. Some players are going to try both. We don't know exactly how it's all going to work out. There will be players that are impacted negatively by this. There are going to be players that are going to get decommitted pretty quick. And I think it's going to impact a lot of players in some of the tier 2 leagues that have gotten Division 1 college commitments. They might have a harder time retaining those. But I still think that there's, those players are gonna be able to do certain things. It's going to be very fascinating to see how this impacts Canadian Junior A. It's a totally different dynamic with that relative to the USHL in terms of, if a player can play, there's actually one player that left the BCHL to go play in the QMJHL and is committed to Cornell. So there's now 2 players. I saw this. I wish I want to credit who broke that story. I feel bad that I'm speaking a little bit out of turn. It's not my scoop, but there's another. So you have Braxton Whitehead and this other player that is already, because he's from the region, but he went to the BCHL to retain his college eligibility, and then is coming back closer to home. So there's a lot of instances like that where things are going to change. But Brad, from the conversations that you've had with college coaches, obviously we've seen Arizona State's approach is let's get after it right now. Let's get after it before it happens. And they commit Braxton Whitehead, who's wearing a letter for the Regina Pats in the WHL right now. What are you hearing in terms of how things are being mobilized? And do you think that everybody's kind of ready for this?
I don't think most teams are ready for this necessarily. It's a completely different world. They've never had to go scout these leagues. They're unfamiliar with a lot of the players, and I think I've heard some apprehension from teams across the board. Even teams that wanted this are a little bit nervous because they just don't know how everything's going to work. So uh, I think there is a lot of apprehension, a lot of trying to prepare, a lot of trying to decipher, how many CHL kids do you try to recruit right away? What types of players are you going after? I think there will be some of the older players that the NCAA goes after. I kind of look at it like the USHL. Are there some older players in the USHL that NCAA teams go after? Absolutely. Are there some late bloomers in the USHL that have popped? Yeah, absolutely. But are college hockey teams going after guys like James Hagens? Yeah, and guess what? They're going to go after Gavin McKenna. There will be there could potentially be issues with some CHL players being NCAA qualifiers if they don't have their core courses in order and don't have academics in order. You have to graduate high school, obviously, to go to college. And there are some parameters that it's potential that not every player is going to hit and be eligible for college. But those that are, if you're a top end player, a top 15 pick, yeah, they're going after those guys. Absolutely. The college hockey is a very
Yeah.
competitive environment. Coaches are battling for their jobs, and uh, they're going to be aggressive in going after these players. It is not going to be a sit back and wait and see what happens. No, I can only imagine how many calls Gavin McKenna's people have gotten in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I mean it could be mass chaos, mass hysteria in some situations where teams are just kind of rearranging, and you're pushing guys off a couple of years that you were planning to bring in that year. Like there's a lot of different things. So there are a couple of other things I want to bring up too. One of the other things that kind of came out when the NHL was kind of explaining to teams, this is how it's going to be, like we got to prepare for this. We don't know exactly what our role is going to be, all that stuff. What they are, what one of the issues is for sure is like, they were talking about, well, we'll just, make sure that, the players don't leave the CHL until after they're 19. Doesn't work that way. They don't get a say in that, unfortunately for them, and unfortunately for everybody. Really, I mean, like, there's no at this point, as we've seen with when NIL came in, when different transfer rules came in, all these things, it was the Wild West, and it still is in a lot of regard. We just saw a kid at UNLV said, "Oh, I didn't get the money I was promised. I'm out of here." From the football team. So, like those are the types of things that still exist. I mean, that's the other factor now. You've got NIL, you've got money into this. You've got some programs that absolutely can put money into that situation. So that does increase a different level of a playing field. We could have new scholarship rules as well if that all passes, and all of a sudden you've got the potential for 26 scholarships and all these other things. But that's the thing, is like, this is a move that creates an interesting market. It creates freedom of movement for the players that didn't previously exist. The only thing that would really, as you mentioned, the academic situation is still very much a thing. Colleges still have a certain level of academic standards that you can get. Like Cornell's not just going to be able to go and pick off every guy that they want, because they're not all going to get into Cornell. And there are definitely players in the CHL that could easily get into Cornell. I mean, I think about Cole Perfetti was like a tremendous student, and once committed to college to play. So like those players exist. And so it's the thing is okay, there's the academic thing, but then also the NHL contract thing. This move, and we don't know yet because this move very well could be the impetus for raising the draft age. It's been discussed a lot, raising it from 18 to 19. We'll see exactly what agents and the NHLPA feel about that, because I also think that you're now barring legal adults from beginning their professional careers if you have a delayed draft, but it has existed in other sports without issue. So I think that that's something that'll be interesting to kind of see what happens. But like the waterfall is coming, like the everything else that has to come from whatever this move is. It slows the law of unintended consequences and different things like that. Well, there are really no unintended consequences because nobody really knows what the consequences ultimately will be. So, I mean, what are some of the things that you're looking at in terms of if this then that can kind of happen in college hockey going forward?
Yeah, and one thing, I think you already alluded to this, but to make it clear, a guy like Berkeley Catton or Tij Aginla, who have signed their pro contracts and went back to junior, that pro contract would still deem them ineligible. So I think one thing we might see is, a player like Catton or Aginla, uh, they may talk to their team, and Seattle may say, "Hey, look, like go play a year of college, develop there instead of signing the player and putting him back in junior." I think a lot of these teams would, not everyone, probably maybe, but I think a lot of them would like to see their player play at a higher level against some older players before they transition into the NHL. And we saw that, with Matty Beniers. The next year, Seattle took Shane Wright, and Shane Wright was in this awkward spot developmentally, and I think Seattle would have loved for Shane Wright to play at college that year. So I think that is something that's yet to be seen. I think from the USA Hockey perspective, one reason they won't like it is because college hockey is going to become significantly less American. A lot of Canadian players are going to come to college hockey to develop. So I think that is something that we will see. I think there's predictions on what the fallout will be in other junior hockey leagues. Everyone's debating. No one really knows what is going to happen there. So I think those are some. And then I do think with the ability of major junior players to play NCAA, I think you are going to see a lot of these first round picks come to college hockey for whether that be a year, 2 years, 3 years. That's generally the time frame for first round picks. And that means college hockey might not be as much a 4-year thing as it used to be. I think that the number of years players stay will end up decreasing with the number of first rounders playing college increasing. Is it going to be super, super dramatic? Like, not every team can add 5 first rounders. Like, the math just doesn't add up there. But I think it will slightly decrease with the ability to add more of these, one and done or two and done type players.
Yeah, it'll be interesting too because, there are definitely players that have chosen the CHL route because they didn't want to go to school, and those players will still have that option.
Yep.
And it's just that if they ever choose that they do want to go to school, they're going to have to, make sure that they maintain whatever academic standards are necessary to get into a Division 1 college. Um, it'll be interesting to see too, because if there's one thing I know about NHL teams is they actually like certainty and control. So I'm still not as convinced as you are that we'll see as many of those first rounders from the CHL enter the NHL. I think part of the reason is the reasons that these leagues are good at development are different, right? College is a shorter schedule, more time for strength training, more individualized kind of stuff. You get, all this high end nutrition, all this other stuff that like is from the Division 1 budgets that they get, especially at the big, like the Big Ten schools. I'm talking more of the, the haves versus the have-nots, like that kind of situation. But you have the shorter schedule in the CHL. You still have the longer schedule. It's a little bit more of a pro style schedule. There's a travel element. There's a bit of a grind to it. All these different things, and some players will still prefer that. I think the thing is that really when you look at it in total, the biggest winners from this decision are the players. They get some freedom, they get the opportunity, they get the chance to, kind of have that mobility that they want. But again, and like there are going to be some Canadian kids, they never grew up with that Division 1 college idea, and they're going to probably stay in the path that's close to them. They may not want to go to the US for school. They might choose to, stay on that CHL path, go to a Canadian university and things of that nature. So there's a lot of those kinds of things that are still left to play out. One of the other things in terms of the waterfall of issues that will come from this, as it stands right now, players drafted from the college path, which is to say Canadian Junior A, USHL, and from the NCAA, NTDP, all these other things, you get 4 years to sign that player. Draft a player out of the CHL, you get 2 years to sign that player. And otherwise their draft rights will either go back into the pool or they'll become a free agent, whatever happens. So, so that again, now you've got to talk collective bargaining. So when you're having the discussion about raising the draft age, do we also have to change? Do we have to do more CBA work to change the length of contracts? Does everybody go on a 2-year deal now? And in that case, then it does, have a negative impact on college because they would have fewer players stay longer than the 2 years if it comes down to that, if that's the way it works out. But yeah, so like those are other things that still have to be sorted out. Glenn Heffernan, the commissioner of the USHL, was on the podcast that Colby Cohen and Johnny Lazarus do for Daily Faceoff. And I didn't catch all of it, but some of the other things is that the USHL is in an interesting position in this whole situation here. Obviously, they've been the beneficiary of players needing to stay eligible. Owen Power always wanted to go to school, so he went to the Chicago Steel. Macklin Celebrini, Adam Fantilli, they went to the Chicago Steel. We were seeing other players that have chosen that. Sasha Boisvert, who's now in Grand Forks at the University of North Dakota, what you cover. So, those players made that decision to come over there. So, like now that Glenn mentioned to them that there's at least been some informal talks with the CHL about kind of what does a partnership look like. And what I've said to people in the USHL, and obviously we love having the USHL on FloHockey and have covered them, but what I've said to coaches and other people that I've talked to, it's time to be progressive. Whatever it is, you got to get in front of this thing because it is going to be, you don't want to get left behind. If you're not proactive, if you're not progressive thinking, if you're not already kind of planning for all these different contingencies, you have a chance to be left behind. I think that they're starting about it the right way. We'll see it ultimately where it ends up, but I do think that, you had some stats about, the fact that the USHL is still a very strong league. A lot of players drafted out of there. There will still be players that choose that route, and choose those teams. But if there is some sort of partnership between the USHL and the CHL, if there is some sort of merger, cross-border merger that unites junior hockey, which maybe that could happen, is there also a path where NHL teams want to make their system, their pro system, more like minor league baseball and bring players into the fold professionally earlier? And there's all sorts of different scenarios that could potentially play out here, and it's impossible for us to know all of them. But I mean, we'll talk. I want to talk also about like what's going to be happening in college hockey this season on the ice, because I think it's a really exciting season on the ice. But I just wanted to, what are there any other things kind of that you're thinking about as this issue kind of comes more to the forefront?
Well, I think you said it with I think the academic piece is a big thing for. There are going to be hockey players who just don't want to go to school, and they're just school's not their thing. They're not going to come to school. I do think the majority of the other players probably are going to end up. I think school's probably the biggest thing. There are players who grew up in the CHL who know nothing about the NCAA and dreamed about the CHL that are going to have their couple of years, but then they're going to hear from their buddies about what college was like. And you mentioned I cover North Dakota. There's going to, coaches are going to be able to go up and say, there's North Dakota plays in front of 12,000 every night. That's more than any major junior team plays in front of. Every meal is cooked for them at the arena. They fly on a charter plane to road games. I think even for players who know nothing about the NCAA, they're going to say, wow, I mean, that sounds like a pretty good setup. And I think you're going to see a lot of those players come down. How it impacts the junior leagues. I wrote a little bit about the USHL's success, because I think I kept hearing, why would a kid even go play in the USHL now? And I'm like, well, because it's a really good league. Like I think there's this perception that major juniors is these major junior leagues are so much better than the USHL, and I just don't see it. There's really good players in both, but I watched a kid who is a 16-year-old in Fargo leave Fargo and go play in the OHL. He had a lot better time playing in the OHL than he did in Fargo. So, I think we'll see how everything plays out. Will there be some kids like Celebrini and Fantilli who now decide, you know what? The reason they went to the USHL was because they wanted to play college hockey. And someone like that may still have that determination that they're going to play college hockey, but say, you know what, I'm just going to stick around home. I'm going to be closer to home. And I think you'll see that with the USHL. I think American players are going to say, I'm going to play college hockey and play junior closer to home. So I think that will be some of the impact, and it'll be interesting to follow in the next few months and to see exactly how many are in year one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It'll be fascinating. One other thing that the USHL does have in its back pocket, and one of the reasons that I think they've also attracted those top end talents, is their tender rule, where you can sign a player ahead of the draft, and basically that's your first round pick, or your second pick. Your first two picks can be those tender signings, which allows them to bypass the draft. It gives the player a little more choice. There's also pending litigation. Well, I don't even think it's been filed, but I don't think there's really been anything. But there's a case in the courts of the CHL draft rules being challenged as well. So like there's all sorts of things. But one thing that we're just to wrap a bow on this is the era we're in amateur athletics. Players are realizing that there's more for them than what has been given to them, in terms of monetary value, in terms of the choice that they get, the different things that they should be owed or feel that they're owed, and basically they're using the legal system very effectively to make these changes. And the situation is that as much as you want to try to control it and put the toothpaste back in the tube, it's out, and it's not going the other way. There will not be rules that restrict these things. Obviously, there could always be the potential for legislation in higher, in even in the Senate, the House of Representatives, that but ultimately, these antitrust laws have been targeted extremely effectively. So it's been one loss after another, and I think that's why we're seeing the change that we're seeing now. And you and I have been talking about it for quite some time, and now here it is. And we'll see how it plays out. The thing is, we don't know what players are going to choose. We don't know what they're going to do. What we do know is that it probably won't change until next August. And if you are not thinking about it right now, you will be left behind. And so that's my message to anybody that is in college hockey and junior hockey across the US and Canada, and even in Europe. Get yourselves ready, because a change is coming, and you need to be prepared to for how to react to that. So we will definitely continue talking about this situation many times here on our podcast. We'll be writing about it. We don't have all the answers, but we will definitely try to give you some. So, Brad, we've talked a lot about things that are happening in boardrooms and in courts and everything else. Let's talk about what's happening on the ice. Um, you know, College hockey season is here. It started last week. We saw some really impressive games last week. There are some incredible games on the schedule for this weekend, including a really a top 5 matchup between Boston College and Michigan State and East Lansing. There's a lot of different things that are happening across college hockey. What are some of the things that you're most looking forward to this season? What are some of the questions that you have going into this season that you're looking forward to being answered?
Yeah, I think every season is kind of unique, so I'm excited to see how this one plays out. I thought there was some signs of parity in opening weekend, just the way we saw. I had Michigan State number 3 nationally, and first night locked in with Lake Superior State in an outstanding game. And I did not. I don't think I had Lake Superior State in the top half of the CCHA. So I think we're seeing some signs of some good depth in college hockey. I think we'll continue to see scores kind of all over the board. I'm looking forward to a bunch of different storylines. The last 2 Hobie Baker winners have been the super freshmen with Adam Fantilli and Macklin Celebrini. And this year, there's another one of those super freshmen in James Hagens at BC. Does he have a chance to win it? Is it going to be his line mate, Ryan Leonard? Can Zeev Buyam at Denver bring it home for a defenseman? I think that's a fun side storyline. And just what teams are going to come out on top at the end of the year. I think BC's got that big first line in goaltending. How far can that carry them? Michigan State has depth in goaltending. How far can that carry them? I think the NCHC keeps winning national championships. Can the NCHC do it again? And lastly, the Big Ten, we're over a decade into realignment, and the Big Ten hasn't won one yet. Can the Big Ten finally get over the hump and win one? There are a couple really good teams in that league again this year. The Big Ten's had more in regular season success the last few years than it did previously. But I think the league is still hoping for that national championship, and we'll see if they can get it done.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting this year, just because I think I feel like Michigan's taken a step back this year. I think Michigan State's going to continue forward. You're never quite sure. Minnesota definitely has a team. There's a lot of questions about what their goaltending is going to look like, but they've got Jimmy Snuggerud and Matthew Wood. So I think it's going to be a highly competitive year in the Big Ten as well. Also, you look at some of the different growth. I think one team that I'm going to be watching is kind of like this dark horse, not really for anything nationally, but more just in terms of where they're going as a program is St. Thomas, and seeing how they've really developed, and they're going to have a new building, on the horizon here. They're moving to the NCHC, all these different things that are coming to the fore. But I'm also really interested to see how Arizona State fares in the NCHC as
Yeah.
well. Cullen Potter was on FloHockey last weekend playing against Air Force, and I have to say, it was impressive. They had an 8-1 win. He scored a goal in that game. And he certainly has the speed and the skill. I think that the playing against the physicality and the size of the NCHC is going to be the real test to see if he's going to be a first round guy. But they have good goalies at Arizona State, a couple of guys that I think can get them through. They did lose the second game after winning 8-1. They lost in overtime because you really cannot go into Colorado Springs against the Air Force and Frank Serratori and think that you're going to waltz out with two easy wins, because they always play hard at Cadet Ice Arena. But I mean, those are some of the things that I'm keeping an eye on as well. But I also wanted to bring it a little closer to home for you because I think North Dakota is a fascinating team this year. They've got a really good recruiting class, but I still feel like I have a lot of questions about what they're ultimately going to be. Is this a year where they can be competitive? Now they did play Augustana in their first first year at the in the first game of the season, and lost. So tell me a little bit about what you saw from UND, and what are the things that we can be looking at from that group this year.
Yeah, they've really managed to find a way to make runs in the regular season several years in a row. They've won the league for the last 5 years. Haven't been able to parlay it into a national championship. So I think that's something they're looking to do. On the front end, forwards, really deep team, I think, up front. UND did lose Jackson Blake, who was a Hobie hat trick finalist and is going to make the Carolina Hurricanes out of camp. So that's a big loss because he was a big part of the offense, but I really think there's a lot of depth up front. The question for me, I guess, is kind of on the back end. I think North Dakota has a lot of really good defensemen, but there's 0 fifth-year seniors, 0 fourth-year seniors, and 1 junior, 7 underclassmen. So it is a very young back end. And in college hockey, usually older defensemen can win. The UND had older defensemen last year. It was a big benefit, especially early in the season. So I think this is a situation where they might have some growing pains early in the season. Denver did last year. Remember, Denver was giving up how many goals a game early last
Yeah.
season. They eventually came around at the end of the year. I think that might be a little bit more of a path that this North Dakota team has to try to follow, that they have to get better as the year goes on. But number two, this first month, North Dakota has a very difficult schedule. It starts this weekend against Providence in the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame game. Should be a great matchup. Then North Dakota goes to Mankato, plays a good Minnesota State team that just won at Yost against Michigan. After that, Boston University is next on the schedule. And after that, Cornell is next. And those are all teams that could compete for conference titles this year. So North Dakota cannot bury itself in the first month. It has to find a way to get some wins, and it has to find a way to get better as the year goes on. So I think that's kind of what I'm looking at this team. They've found a way more often than not recently to winning this league, but this is going to be a challenge with a younger D.
Yeah, I think absolutely that's true. And boy, Denver at times, it was really hard. It was almost, for a lot of the season, it was hard to get over how how leaky they were at the beginning of the
Mhm.
season. And meanwhile, that was actually, and really one of the reasons why I think David Carl is one of the best coaches in the country, and really one of the best coaches in hockey, and the fact that he's so young. But like, you look at Zeev Buium from the start of the year to the end of the year, and being a good offensive defenseman to being a great all around defenseman over the course of one season. He was one of the best shutdown guys by the time that we got to the national championship game. It was like, good luck. Good luck out there. So it's really, I think Denver is going to be fascinating. They're absolutely a repeat contender. But you did mention one team that North Dakota has on its schedule that I've had circled this year. A team that I'm intrigued by, and a team that I think is going to be playing a very motivated brand of hockey, and that's Cornell. Mike Schaefer, been there for
Mhm.
a long time. He is retiring after this season. Casey Jones is the coach in waiting. He came over from Clarkson, going back to Cornell. a great recruiter over the years at Cornell and also at Clarkson. He's brought in some high end players to the Golden Knights when he was there. But Mike Schaefer, he's a staple in college hockey. You always know what you're going to get when you see Cornell play. I think they've had one of the more like they look like Stanley Cup playoff hockey more than any team. I think them in North Dakota typically have like that heaviness that it's every time you're going to feel it when you play them kind of thing. And they've got some pieces. And if people, we try to memory hole COVID as much as we can. I get that. But right when the season that COVID ended, Cornell was number one in the country in men's and women's hockey. And few places have been hit as hard by NIL transfers and COVID as the Ivies have, because they don't they're not doing transfers. They're not doing some of these other things. And so, based on what you've seen, like, I don't know, we won't see them play for a while because that's another thing the Ivies do that is a little bit frustrating, is that they don't play until later in the season. But I mean, what are the chances of them kind of maybe taking over in the ECAC and potentially competing for a national title? I mean, like, I feel like, yes, they lost some key players, but I still feel like there's some real potential there.
Yeah, I have them winning the ECAC, and I have them top 10 in the country. I think just outside the top five. Um, but I think you're right. They have a lot of guys back. I think one of the names we're going to be mentioning in a year in our end of the season NCAA free agent podcast is Ben Robertson, the defenseman for
Yep.
Cornell. He's been sensational there. Ian Shane's back in net. They're just a lot of really good pieces for that Cornell team. So I do think this is setting up for the Big Red to make a run. And I do think you make a lot of good points about how hard some of this transition has been for Ivy League teams. And it's actually amazing that Cornell's been able to withstand it. Like you said, it's very difficult for them to take on transfers. They can't have fifth-year seniors while everyone else is getting a little bit older. They can't do that.
Yep.
And that's the one Ivy program that's been great. And Ben Sire, also we should mention, as an assistant coach there, did a terrific job and was part of that. He's now over at Princeton, so we'll see if he can replicate some of that success in a few years at Princeton.
Yeah. Yeah. One other name for Cornell to watch for that I think is a breakout candidate this season is Ryan Walsh, the Boston Bruins draft pick and former
Yeah.
Cedar Rapids Rough Rider. He's a spark plug player, kind that really seems to excel at Cornell. And we'll see if they're yelling at Cornell this year. So we'll go with that. But we talk a little bit before we get out of here. I want to talk quickly about some just Hobey Baker candidates, different guys that are going to be in the mix. Obviously, James Hagens, we've already talked about, draft eligible prospect. We've talked about him a lot. I think that's a guy. Zeev Buyam is another one where I just feel like, hey, he honestly, he would have been in my top three last year. I think that it was a very competitive field. But he had one of the best seasons we've ever seen a freshman defenseman have in college hockey. I think that will only continue as he plays probably upwards of 25 minutes a game. In the bigger games, 28, 29 minutes a game. Wouldn't be shocked by that. He's going to be a big time player for them and that. But I mean, who are some of the guys that you've got circled outside of those two that I just mentioned?
Yeah, I think from BC, they probably have three guys that you have to keep an eye on with Leonard Hagens. I mean, you could throw out Perot too, but I think Fowler in net is a guy that is going to be interesting to watch. You mentioned Buyam. I think Jimmy Snuggerud from Minnesota is a guy that should score tons of goals and be a Hobey Baker candidate. I think Trey Augustine is good enough to do that at Michigan State. If we're looking at staying with the Michigan State theme, Isaac Howard's off to a really fast start there as well. And if he continues putting up the points like that, he's a guy that's going to get a look. Off the top of my head, who knows if Ben Robertson continues to put up that many points over at Cornell on the back end. If he can get a look, I think Liam McClinsky from Holy Cross is kind of an obvious choice. He's just been so good for the last 2 years, and a lot of those guys have ended up in the transfer portal. Liam McClinsky did not. He is headed back to Holy Cross for another year. He was a finalist last year, the best player in the league, and so I think that's another name to watch. Do I think he's going to win it out of Atlantic? That's probably a difficult um, thing to do, but I definitely think he's talent wise can be a finalist there. So I'm probably forgetting names off the top of my head, but those are a few that just jump off the page.
Yeah, I think, I'm glad you brought up Liam McClinsky, and, you can watch Holy Cross games on FloHockey as well. And Liam McClinsky, a guy who did transfer to Holy Cross from Quinnipiac. He's a big body. He's a guy that I think should get some pro looks this year. And I think a huge credit to him, and also the job that Bill Riga is doing at Holy Cross. And, they've been a bit of a doormat over the years. And I feel like, that getting Bill Riga in and coming, he's shown some recruiting prowess. He's shown the ability to get guys in. And when you have a guy like Liam McClinsky buy into your program, it gives you an opportunity to really build from there. And so we'll see what the Crusaders look like over the course of the season. Atlantic hockey is by no means going to be an easy road for anybody. The parity in that league is
Yep.
always there. And also, we talked about Mike Schaefer, also the final year of Brian Riley's illustrious coaching career, having been at Army. There has been a Riley at the helm of West Point since for 75 years. So
Mhm.
like, or how long? I mean, if his dad was, of course, the famous Jack Riley, who led the 1960 team, Olympic team, to gold in Squaw Valley, and just like incredible legacy being left there. So, good reminder that you can watch Atlantic hockey games and Alaska Fairbanks home games on FloHockey. A lot of college hockey here, and a lot of women's hockey as well. Atlantic Hockey America, 5 of the 6 teams, all their games at home are on our platform. We also have some of the teams in Newha as well, including St. Anselm and others. So it's really a great time to be a college hockey fan. Before we get out of here, I didn't get a chance to read your preview yet, so I'm going into this completely blind. You've been pretty good on your predictions over the years. What do you got for national championship this year?
Yeah, it actually hasn't come out, so I'll be posting that soon. But I have BC at number one. I just saw the way one big top line can carry them. I like BC's defenseman, and I really think the difference for me is Fowler in net. If they did not have someone of that caliber in net, I might have dropped them. But I think they have a national title winning goalie, and he won a USHL title. So he's won before. I have Minnesota 2. I think that the Gophers have more depth than BC. Um, but, a question, their goaltending may be great. I just don't know what it is. I haven't seen Nathan Airy play yet. And maybe it'll be the Penn State transfer in that too. Number 3, I had Michigan State. Big Ten champion from a year ago. A lot of guys back, a lot of depth, great goaltending. I know they lost Levshinov, but I think they're going to be all right. Number 4, I have Denver as the preseason NCHC favorite. Some big important losses up front, but I think the difference is Denver had guys playing on the third, fourth lines who are ready for the bigger role. I don't think it's going to be too much to ask for some of these guys to move up lines. I think Aiden Thompson's ready for a bigger role, guys like that. And then to round out the top 5, I had North Dakota at 5. I think depth is really strong at North Dakota. If they can get those young defensemen up to speed, I like the talent there. It's just getting them up to speed. And once they do, I think that's going to be a pretty good team. And off the top of my head, I think I might have had Cornell lurking right there at 6. So pretty good top teams there. Also, I feel when I was going down the list, especially in some of these leagues, like Hockey East, I think I had BC, BU 1, 2, and then like 3 through 8 were all like unbelievably close to me. I felt like I was shifting them around every single day. I didn't know what to do. So I think we are going to see a lot of standings that end up very close at the end of the season, where 1 or 2 points could jump you a lot of different positions.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating year. I mean, I really feel like it's a wide open season. I also, I had Denver as my preseason number one, but BC is right there. And I think BC is probably going to be my national championship pick as well. And a lot of it is because of Jacob Fowler. I mean, I think that you can have the big scoring line. I think, another guy that's a pretty underrated defenseman that I think is poised for a breakout is Drew Fortescue. He's very good on both sides of the puck, especially defensively. I think that he's a smart defender. I like that too. So I think BC, and then you look at Denver and you say, okay, well they have goaltending back, they have Zeev Buyam, they have Jack Devine back. They're added some really nice freshmen, Hagen Burrows, James Reeder, guys that are going to help them up front, and then have the experience, and then a transfer like Eric Polkamp is such a huge boost to their blue line after losing Shai Buyam. So I think that there's a lot of really good things there. It's going to be a fascinating year, Brad. As always, I can't thank you enough for joining me. As I told you before we started, you explain things really well. So I appreciate you helping our audience understand what's happening with the NCAA and the CHL. But we will be following your work at the Grand Forks Herald, following you at Schlossman GF, correct, on Twitter. Or X, if that's the way you want to say it. And yeah, but I mean, thanks as always for hopping on the pod. Talking Hockey Sense is made better when you're on it, my friend. So thanks for joining us once again.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
All right, that's Brad Schlossman from the Grand Forks Herald. We thank him, as always, for his tremendous contributions to the podcast. Before we get out of here, I do want to talk to you a little bit. We got a lot of things coming up on FloHockey. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it is the start of the AHL season, October 11th through the 13th, opening weekend. We've got a free live to social game across social media for FloHockey. So you'll be able to see the Hershey Bears against the Cleveland Monsters. Hershey will be raising their banner. That is on October 12th at 6:30 p.m. is when the broadcast starts. The puck drops at 7 p.m. You'll be able to see top prospects from the Washington Capitals and Columbus Blue Jackets, and also watch the Hershey Bears lift their 13th Calder Cup banner to the rafters in Hershey Park. So a really exciting weekend for us here at FloHockey. There's also a ton of great hockey from college, junior, whatever you want. There is a lot of it. And then next week, October 18th, we will see the opening of the ECHL season, the SPHL season. Pro hockey has never been more accessible now that it is all under one banner with FloHockey, every league underneath the NHL, also now including 100 English commentary games from the Swedish Hockey League. We've got some big ones coming up. For Linda is a team that you can catch often on our site. You can also see Skellefteå coming very soon as well. A lot of great games featuring top prospects that you will definitely be seeing in the NHL very soon. Make sure you are subscribed right now on FloHockey. You do not want to miss any of the great stuff we have. We've also got a ton of content coming your way, AHL season previews, and a lot more that we are going to continue to put forward, and just hopefully you guys enjoy it, because we're having a lot of fun putting it together. Lots more to come in the coming weeks on FloHockey, but that's going to do it for this week's episode of Talking Hockey Sense. Huge thanks to Brad Schlossman for joining us. Thanks to Ever for producing, and thanks to all of you for listening, watching, and following this podcast. It's been our pleasure to bring it to you. Plenty more to come on FloHockey throughout the week. I'm Chris Peters. This is Talking Hockey Sense. We'll catch you next time.